The wind cut through the streets of Redstone Gulch like a knife that morning. It carried dust and the sharp smell of coal from the mines on the hill. Outside Dalton's mercantile, a young woman stood pressed against the wooden wall, her arms wrapped tight around a child who barely moved. Emma Hart knew the sound of hunger better than any song. For 5 days, her little girl had cried until her voice broke. Then she cried without sound. Now she lay quiet against Emma's chest, her small body light as a feather. Emma's heart pounded with fear. Silence from a starving child was not peace. It meant the body was giving up. Emma lowered her head and kissed the top of the girl's hair. "Hold on, Daisy," she whispered. "Mama's trying." She opened her hand and looked down. 7 cents. The coins rested in her palm like a cruel joke. She had counted them so many times the numbers lived in her fingers. They never changed. Inside the mercantile, warm lantern light glowed through the window. Families moved between shelves, buying bread, milk, and salted pork like it was any ordinary morning. The smell drifted out every time the door opened. Emma's stomach twisted so hard she had to close her eyes. 3 months earlier, her husband Samuel had walked into the Redstone mine before dawn. He never walked back out. The company called it a collapse. They said it like it was bad weather, a thing that happened and no one could stop. They paid for a coffin. They paid for a short prayer. The next morning, they told Emma to leave the company cabin. "Those houses are for working families," the foreman had said. Emma had stared at him with empty eyes. She had worked, too, scrubbing floors, washing clothes until her hands cracked open. But none of that mattered. Since then, she had sold everything that could buy food. Her wedding ring, her mother's dishes, her winter coat. The dress she wore had once been a bright green. Now it hung faded and loose around her thin frame. Her shoes were cracked and open at the toes. Cold morning air crept through the holes and numbed her feet. In her arms, Daisy stirred weakly. The child turned her head, searching for something that was not there. Emma felt her chest tighten so hard she could barely breathe. "Please, God," she whispered, "just help me feed my baby." The bell above the mercantile door rang when Emma pushed it open. Warm air hit her first. The smell of flour, coffee, and sugar wrapped around her like a memory from another life. Her stomach twisted again, sharp with hunger. The talking inside the store slowly stopped. People turned. Eyes moved over Emma's thin dress, her worn shoes, the child in her arms. The room grew quiet in a way that made Emma's skin prickle. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Dalton, a tall woman with silver hair pulled tight at the back of her head. She looked up from her ledger and frowned. She did not smile. She did not even wait. "We don't give charity here," Mrs. Dalton said loudly. The words fell across the room like stones. Emma swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry as sand. "Please, ma'am," she said softly. "My little girl hasn't eaten in 5 days. I have 7 cents. Just a little bread. Anything." Mrs. Dalton's lips pressed together. "Hard work builds character," she said. "Not handouts." Emma lifted Daisy a little higher, hoping the sight might soften the woman's heart. The child's cheeks were pale. Her lashes rested on her skin like faint shadows. A few men in clean coats shifted their boots and looked away. A woman in a fur collar leaned close to her friend and whispered something. Both of them glanced at Emma's dress with thin smiles. Emma heard the words like needles. "Shouldn't have children if you can't feed them." Probably wasted her money. "She'll bring trouble." Emma's face burned. Still, she did not move. "I'll work for it," she said. "I can clean, I can mend, I can do anything. Just give me something for her." Mrs. Dalton shook her head slowly. "There's always work for those willing to find it." Emma almost laughed. The sound stuck in her chest and turned into something closer to a sob. She had asked everywhere. The laundry, the boarding house, the saloon kitchen. No one wanted a desperate widow with a sick child. The bell over the door rang again. This time the room went quiet in a different way. A man stepped inside. tall enough that the doorframe looked too small around him. Dust covered his coat and boots. His hat sat low over his eyes. His shoulders were wide and steady, the kind built from long days riding cattle and mending fences. Near a barrel of nails stood Marshal Carter Reeves. The lawman straightened quickly when he saw the newcomer. "Afternoon, Mr. Mercer," the marshal said, suddenly respectful. The big man gave a small nod. He said nothing. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds rolling over the mountains. They moved slowly across the store, noticing everything. Then those eyes landed on Emma, and on Daisy. The man's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the child's pale face and the way her small chest barely rose. Emma felt exposed, like he could read every hungry night written across her skin. Mrs. Dalton cleared her throat. "Now, Luke," she said sharply, "don't go getting soft. Some folks make their own mess." The man did not look at her. His eyes stayed on the child. His hands slowly clenched at his sides. Then something happened no one in the store expected. Moisture gathered in the corner of his eye. A tear slid down his cheek, slow and heavy, like it belonged to a man who had not cried in years. Emma's breath caught. She had never seen a man like this cry. Not in Redstone Gulch. Not ever. Marshal Reeves stepped forward, his voice careful. "Ma'am," he said to Emma, "a child needs proper care. If you can't provide it, the county might have to make arrangements." Emma's heart dropped into her stomach. She knew what that meant. The poorhouse. The place where children disappeared into cold beds and hard work. She clutched Daisy tighter. "Please," Emma whispered, "don't take her from me. She's all I have left." Quote, the big man finally moved. His boots struck the wooden floor with a heavy sound. He walked to the counter and stopped in front of Mrs. Dalton. He towered over her, but his voice stayed calm. "How much?" he asked. Mrs. Dalton blinked. "For what?" "For everything she needs." The man's voice was deep and steady. "Food, milk, medicine, blankets." He looked directly at her. "How much?" Mrs. Dalton blinked several times like she had not heard him right. "For everything?" she asked. The tall man did not move. "Everything," he repeated. The store was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock could be heard over the shelves. Mrs. Dalton cleared her throat and began pulling items from behind the counter. "Well, bread, milk, flour, medicine, blankets," she muttered while counting in her head. Before she could finish, the man reached inside his coat. He placed several folded bills on the wooden counter. More money than Emma had seen since her husband was alive. The bills sat there like a command. Mrs. Dalton's mouth tightened, but she grabbed a basket and began filling it quickly. A loaf of bread, a bottle of milk, a small sack of flour, a jar of honey, a tin of fever medicine, a thick wool blanket. No one spoke. People watched like they were seeing a strange miracle. Marshal Reeves shifted his boots uneasily. "Luke," he said carefully, "you don't want to encourage." One quiet look from the big man stopped him. The basket filled quickly. The man lifted it easily with one hand and turned toward Emma. Up close, Emma could see the deep lines around his eyes. Lines carved by years of wind, work, and something heavier. His voice softened. "Come," he said gently, "your girl needs to drink." Emma followed him outside without thinking. A sturdy wagon waited by the hitching post. Two strong horses stamped their hooves in the cold air. The man helped Emma climb up with careful hands, steady and respectful. Then he handed her the bottle of milk. "Slow," he said quietly, "just a little." Emma tipped the bottle toward Daisy's lips. For one terrible moment, the child did not move. Emma felt her heart stop. Then Daisy's mouth twitched. She latched weakly and swallowed a few tiny sips. Emma's breath broke out of her like a sob. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know how to repay you." The man climbed onto the driver's seat but did not take the reins yet. "My name is Luke Mercer," he said. His voice carried the quiet weight of the mountains around them. "I've got a ranch in Silver Creek Valley." About 10 miles from here. Quote. Emma nodded slowly. I'm Emma Hart, she said, and this is Daisy. Luke looked down at the little girl again. When did she last eat a full meal? He asked. There was no blame in his voice, only concern. Emma's hands trembled slightly. Before the mine took my husband, she said. Luke went still. The wind moved softly through the street. For a long moment he did not speak. Then his voice came low, like the words were heavy. My wife and my daughter died in a fire 2 years ago. Emma looked up sharply. The grief on his face was not new. It was old and deep, worn into the lines of his skin. I couldn't save them, he said quietly. Emma felt her chest ache with a strange understanding. Some pain did not fade with time. It simply settled deeper. Luke finally took the reins. My place has food, he said. Warm beds. Quiet. The wagon began to roll down the dirt road. You don't have to sleep in doorways anymore. Emma held Daisy close as the town slowly faded behind them. The road opened into wide country. Mountains rose blue and white in the distance. The wind carried the smell of pine and open grass. Daisy continued sipping the milk slowly, color beginning to return faintly to her cheeks. Emma watched Luke carefully. Help like this usually comes with a price, she said quietly. Luke shook his head. I want her to live, he said. That's all. The wagon rolled for nearly 2 hours. Eventually, the road dipped into a wide green valley where tall grass moved like waves in the wind. Luke pointed ahead. Home. Emma followed his gaze. A large ranch house stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees. Smoke curled from the chimney. A long porch wrapped around the front of the house. It looked peaceful. But as they rode closer, Emma noticed something else. A small wooden swing in the yard. Still. Unused. A faded toy horse sitting on the porch. A child's world that had been left behind. Inside, the house was clean, but quiet, in a strange way. Like time had stopped there. On the mantel sat a framed photograph. Luke stood beside a smiling woman. Between them was a little girl with bright eyes and curls. They're my girls, Luke said softly. Sarah and Annie. Emma held Daisy tighter. The house felt full of memories that had nowhere to go. Luke led them upstairs to a guest room with clean white sheets. Across the hall was another door. Luke paused there. He did not open it. Emma understood without asking. That room had belonged to a child who never came home again. That night, Daisy managed a few spoonfuls of soup by the fire. Her eyes opened wider than they had in days. Good, Mama, she whispered weakly. Emma pressed her forehead to Daisy's hair and breathed in the warm smell of broth and wood smoke. For the first time in days, hope flickered. Then a sound broke the quiet. Hooves. Emma looked up. Luke's head snapped toward the window. His whole body went tight. Through the glass, Emma saw lights moving across the dark valley. Torches, several of them. Voices drifted through the night air. Luke stood slowly. His voice was low and hard now. Stay here, he said. Keep Daisy close. Emma walked to the doorway and looked outside. Riders were coming up the road toward the ranch. Their torches burned like angry stars in the dark. Emma's stomach twisted. The town had not come to offer help. They had come to take something away. Luke stepped onto the porch before the riders reached the fence. He did not grab a rifle. He did not shout. He simply stood there, tall and still, like the house itself had grown a spine. Behind him, Emma stood in the doorway, with Daisy pressed against her chest. The little girl was warm now, breathing easier, but still fragile. The riders stopped in the yard. Marshal Carter Reeves climbed down first. His face looked tired, like a man who wished he had stayed home. Behind him came Mrs. Dalton, wrapped in a dark shawl, her chin lifted high. 3 churchwomen followed close behind her. Their eyes went straight to Emma. Not curious, judging. Evening, Luke, the marshal called. Luke's voice stayed calm. "This is my land. Say what you came to say." Mrs. Dalton stepped forward, holding her torch high. "We came because the town has concerns," she said sharply. "About the woman you brought here." Emma felt Daisy stir weakly against her shoulder. Marshal Reeves cleared his throat. "Emma Hart," he said carefully. "Folks in Redstone Gulch are worried about the child's welfare." Quote. Emma felt her stomach turn cold. "There's talk you're living improper under Mr. Mercer's roof." Improper. Emma had heard that word her whole life. It followed poor women like a shadow. Mrs. Dalton spoke louder. "An unmarried woman living in a man's house," she said. "What kind of example is that?" Luke's voice stayed steady. She and her child were starving. "That's not the point," one of the churchwomen snapped. She stepped forward, holding a leather folder. "We have papers signed by Judge Holbrook." She opened the folder slowly. "We are authorized to remove the child until proper arrangements can be made." Emma felt the world tilt under her feet. "No," she said, her voice rough. She stepped backward instinctively. "You cannot take her. She is mine." Daisy whimpered softly in her arms. Marshal Reeves looked uncomfortable. "This isn't meant to be cruel," he said quietly. "A child needs stability, a proper home." "This is a proper home," Luke said. His voice dropped lower. "Food, warm beds, safety." Mrs. Dalton stepped closer. "You think money solves everything?" she hissed. "You cannot buy back a woman's reputation." One of the churchwomen leaned forward. "And we all remember what happened to your first family," she said sharply. The yard went silent. Emma saw Luke's chest rise once, hard. "Maybe if you had been a better husband," the woman continued coldly, "your wife and daughter would still be alive." The words hung in the air like poison. Emma felt rage rush through her body. "How dare you?" she said. Her voice shook, but she stepped forward anyway. "He saved my child when all of you watched her die in the street." Mrs. Dalton's lips curled. "A desperate woman will say anything." Luke finally spoke again. "You will not speak about my wife and daughter again," he said quietly. Marshal Reeves lifted his hands. "Luke, don't make this worse." He looked toward Emma. "There are other arrangements. A church room. The county house can take the girl until you find work." Emma's heart nearly stopped. The poorhouse. Cold beds. Strangers raising her child. Daisy stirred and lifted her small hand weakly toward Luke. "Big man," she whispered. Her voice was soft but clear. "No, take me." Luke swallowed hard. He stepped closer and gently touched her tiny fingers. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said softly. Mrs. Dalton scoffed. "You are not her father," she said. "You are a lonely rancher with a house full of ghosts." Emma felt her chest tighten. She could see the truth in Luke's eyes. Helping them could cost him everything. His ranch, his reputation, his life. Emma lowered her eyes. "Maybe I should go," she whispered. Luke turned sharply. "No." "They will destroy you," Emma said quietly. "I can't be the reason for that." "You and Daisy are not a burden," Luke said. "You are a life." Marshal Reeves stepped forward again. "Emma," he said gently, "come back into town. We'll find a proper place." Daisy began to cry softly. She clung to Emma's dress and turned her face toward Luke again. "I stay," she whispered. "Here." Luke looked down at her for a long moment. Then he straightened. "You want proper?" he said. "Fine." Emma looked up, confused. Luke reached back and took Emma's hand. His grip was warm and steady. "This woman is not living here as charity," he said clearly. "She is not some shame for you to whisper about." Mrs. Dalton frowned. "Luke." He did not stop. He looked at Emma. Torchlight flickered across his face. "She is going to be my wife." The words fell into the night like thunder. Emma froze. "What?" she whispered. The riders began murmuring. Marshal Reeves blinked in surprise. Mrs. Dalton looked stunned. "A marriage would settle the legal concern," the marshal said slowly, "if it's real." "It will be," Luke said. Emma's hands trembled. Luke leaned closer so only she could hear. "I need you to trust me," he whispered. Before she could answer, A new sound cut through the night. A horse riding fast. Everyone turned. A thin man rode into the yard and jumped down quickly. He held folded papers in his hand. "Emma Hart," the man called loudly. Emma went stiff. "I'm Thomas Hart," he said smugly. "Samuel's brother, Daisy's uncle." He lifted the papers. "I've come to take the child." The yard went silent again. Emma's arms tightened around Daisy. "She stays with me," Emma said. Thomas sneered. "You can't even feed her," he said. "You're hiding behind this man's money." His eyes moved toward Luke, a man who couldn't even save his own family. The air turned cold. Daisy lifted her tired eyes and looked at Thomas. Then she turned toward Luke. "Mean man," she whispered. A quiet laugh escaped someone in the crowd. Thomas's confidence faltered. Luke stepped forward slowly. "You're late," he said calmly. "Where were you when she was starving in the street?" Thomas said nothing. Luke looked at Marshal Reeves. "We're getting married tomorrow," he said. The marshal nodded slowly. "That makes this home legal." Thomas's grip tightened on the papers. "This isn't over," he muttered. But his voice had lost its edge. He climbed back onto his horse and rode away into the dark. One by one, the others followed. Soon the valley was quiet again. Emma's legs gave out. She sat on the porch step, shaking. Luke crouched beside her. "You all right?" he asked gently. "You didn't have to risk everything," Emma whispered. Luke looked out across the dark valley. "I already lost everything once," he said. "I'm not losing you two as well." Emma studied his face. "You meant it," she said softly. Luke nodded. "Yes." Emma looked down at Daisy, who was safe and warm in her arms. Maybe life could begin again. "If I marry you," she said quietly, "it has to be real. Not a rescue." Luke pulled a small velvet box from his coat. "I was going to ask you anyway," he said. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Luke said honestly. Daisy's sleepy voice floated up. "Mama, happy." Emma laughed softly through her tears. Luke held out the ring. "Emma Hart," he said gently. "Will you marry me?" Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Luke slid the ring onto her finger. Inside the house, the fire crackled softly. Outside, the valley rested under quiet stars. In the weeks that followed, the ranch slowly came alive again. Daisy's cheeks filled with color. Her laughter returned. The old swing in the yard moved again for the first time in 2 years. Emma opened the curtains that had stayed closed too long. She set the table each night for 3, because family had a way of growing. One bright morning, with a preacher standing on the porch, Emma married Luke Mercer. Later that day, Daisy climbed into Luke's lap. "Papa Luke," she said proudly. Luke's eyes filled with tears. "That's right," he whispered. Emma watched them from the doorway, her hand resting on her belly where a new life had begun. She once counted 7 cents like it was the end of the world. Now she counted blessings instead. If you love Wild West stories filled with passion and heart, like this video and subscribe to Wild West Tales of Love for new stories every single day.